Hello, Culture Matters podcast. I'm so excited to introduce you to our guest. Before I do that, here is a quote for this episode. I am a grinder of extraordinary proportions. I know exceptional grinders, stunning grinders, ones who will forever be sewn into the history books of our time. The absolute best in the class pedigree of grinders. And in this book, I share my observation of these species, their practices, and their elusive and never written about tactics and traits. Christine Beckwith said that in her new book, Hi. And I want to read before I introduce you to our guest. If you listen to the Culture Matters podcast, you know Christine. Go back to the beginning, the first couple seasons of the show. We're into 50 plus, 60 plus seasons by the time you're listening to this. Christine's been a staple on the show, a partner in the show. We have over 20 episodes of Finding Honor, Your Journey to the Truth on the show, chapter by chapter. And today I'm introducing this new book, this astounding book, and I want to read a testimonial for the book that I cried this morning reading. Quote, if you're holding this book in your hands or beginning the audio version, then you've literally stumbled upon a treasure map. But this isn't a dusty old map with X's and dotted lines you have to decode. This is a meticulously crafted step-by-step guide put together by someone who knows how to play the game and win. And if you're serious about leveling up in the cutthroat world of sales, you'd better pay attention. Let me tell you about Christine. I've known her for years, and she's the real deal. Hers isn't a fly-by-night success story. Christine is the embodiment of what it means to crush it, day in and day out. But here's the thing that sets her apart. She is a relentless winner, and she is a giver. She's poured her heart, soul, and yes, a small fortune into helping others achieve the kind of success she's built. That's why when she asked me to write this forward, I didn't say yes. I said, hell yes. It goes on for pages, and I don't want to start crying, but the real Brad Lee wrote this profound forward, and I cried this morning reading it, preparing for this podcast.
It was amazing to get.
And if anyone that knows Brad knows he's the real deal and only would put that degree of effort into something he actually cared about. And I know because of how long it took him to write The Hard Way, he really, really thought about it and wrote every word himself. This forward is profound. It made me cry. And I'm like, I was posted. So we have Hi. Christine, you're unbelievable. The first chapter, we're talking about the grind.
Yeah.
Why start a book high selling or high selling is a drug? That's
About high selling.
Yeah, about high selling. Why start with the grind? What is the grind?
Yeah. I mean, I'll start by telling you when you write a book, and I have the same editor and writing coach I've had for all 6 of my books, Candy Zalkowski. I say her name out loud because she's brilliant in this area. And, before I got my first book to go live after 10 years of writing, it had been seen by another editor and I'd been discouraged, even though I hadn't fully, read that person's editing of what they thought of my book, which was very positive. Candy, people always say, like, do you write your own books? And I'm like, every single word. And I'm harsh as an author because if I have a certain sentiment and, Candy edits my book and the sentiment gets lost in like grammatical or spelling error or placement, I will override her editing. I want to start there. Now, I want to tell you, there's very few times that she's not correct in saying I've written whole chapters and place them in the front of the book. And she's been like, that's the last chapter. It's not the first chapter. That's the middle. It's not the end, whatever. But one of the things that she's coached me to do is to write an outline when you start of the 20 chapters. Most books have 20 chapters of what you think you're going to talk about. And this book, just to overview it, it's funny how books come to you because it's like they are somewhere in your soul, at least for me as a writer. Our book, Finding Honor, The Journey to the Truth, was, it was inside me. I had a desire to change the shape of how the public viewed me as somebody beating my chest with nothing but awards behind a white picket fence. For my son's sake, I wanted him one day to pick up a book where my troubles and my hardships and my missteps were all there for his devouring, not only the missteps, but the corrections and then the path forward, so that people could see that the journey towards your highest and happiest self is hard, facing the truths of who you are and then overcoming your deficits and all those things. My whole career has been dedicated to selling. I didn't know I'd be a sales girl. I went to college for um, sports medicine and nutrition. I always wanted to be in the medical field. I didn't really want to be a nurse. I had been a candy striper for an elderly home for a couple of years, and it was really crappy work. And I just thought, man, these guys are like glorified pet bedpan changers and, medicine providers. Like they're not really doing meaningful medical work. And, I thought I'm an athlete. I like competing. I want to be in great shape. I'm going to go examine the sports world. And it gave me a great education and base that I still use today in my world holistically. Having said this, I end up, my story is that I end up on in a customer service department in a loan department of a credit union, my first promotion from the teller line. And I got that promotion over tenured people because I learned a little trade. Every time someone came in the old days with their coupon book for a loan, when they got to their last payment, there was something called an actuated payoff. And it was a calculation that required a specific interest bearing calculator. And the actual calculation was very difficult. It was not, practical math. And I would have to wait for the head teller to come over and do this for me. Every time I had a customer, I'd have to call the head teller. And it really annoyed me that I couldn't serve the client like immediately. And so I asked to be trained on how to do it. And when I got trained on how to do it, all the other tellers started asking me to do it because they had never trained themselves. They had never thought to be resourceful enough and not just stand there and wait for the manager. And then that gave way because it showed something in me when the loan department asked for an assistant and I ended up being assistant to a loan officer. This is where the grind begins in my mind because I started to see the money that this loan officer made. I started to see the complexity of the job. I started to see that there was a winning over of the client. And I liked that. I liked the idea that people want to do things sometimes financially, but they don't have the expertise or the wherewithal, and they need convincing to take those steps. And that kind of, enticed me, and certainly making the money that was way higher than what field I was in. I had actually done a 2-year internship as a assistant to a chiropractor. And I also hated that job and was not good at it. And I won't go down that rabbit hole. But while I was doing that part-time, I was working for the credit union. And I just started to realize, like, I like this selling thing. And so back then there wasn't licensure. If you wanted to be a loan officer, you raised your hand and said, hey, I think I want to be a loan officer. And if someone was like, yeah, we'll train you, that's what happened. And I did that. Um, Showing that I could do it through assistance. And I began my, my quest in the mortgage field very young in my early 20s. And I want to tell you, I was, this chapter opens up and talks about my first placement. It goes back to the beginning of my selling career. And throughout this book, there are stories, but it's all specific to selling. Like, you're not going to really hear me talk about my personal life. You're not going to hear me talk about my personal stories. You're going to hear me talk about all of the best in class selling stories. The times when, we had to overcome market conditions, the times when I was given crappy teams and, had to figure out how to make them performers, how I recruited, how I grew companies, and there are personal stories in there that I've shared of individuals, because it's not just about me, it's about the best in class salespeople that I've witnessed, which is why it's also a picture book, which is a fun part we can talk about in a minute. But when I put the outline down, I thought, your first couple chapters have to seize the reader. It has to grab the reader, like, man, this is good. I want to read on. It's like a movie. A lot of times movie starts from the end and shows like the crime that's being committed and then stops and backs up to 2 years before. Why do you see that so much in storytelling? Well, because they wouldn't keep you all the way to the fucking, alarming ending that's epic if they didn't show you where it was going to begin with and then back into the story. And so the grind describes an individual who, if you're reading this book, if you pick up this book, I'm assuming you're either a leader that wants your salespeople to be better, you're a leader that wants to lead salespeople better, or you're a salesperson that wants to get better. And I believe when you're starting to read this book, The Grind, you're going to associate yourself with something that could be kind of negative. And it bears saying that it was very difficult to name this book. I knew it would be about high selling, but I just didn't know what to name it. And I went through 20 different words and processing. And then to put a tagline that has a negative connotation, I've had so many people say to me, the word drug is like negative. You don't think that's going to turn people off? I said, not the real sales guys. No. I think if it does, you're not the person for this book. I think it really hits home with real sales guys. I think when they look at it, they're like, yes, it is, because the money and the grind are addictive. And that's where I open up the book. I talk about the addiction of the grind, because work can be an addiction. This is a dance, a sultry dance with money and overcoming and achieving. And, selling comes with reward and recognition and all these lusty things. And, I unpacked my first quest as a loan officer, being placed on a team of 20 people and kind of not having the red carpet rolled out to me from, a female that's on the team. And I'm going to tell you, as I'm writing this book, I spoke in my real, raw, brutally honest voice. There was no culling of my language. When I wanted to say the F word in the book, I said it. And I don't think there's a ton of those, but for emphasis, there are some. And I called this woman names. I've never done that because I'm always like a polished professional, but and I'm not saying, I don't want you to assume they're like bad names. My description of her is real. This woman was not kind. This woman was jealous of me being there. She was a person that was at the top of the food chain. And, as humans, we have hate and jealousy inside us that come from a natural well. And for her to look at me as like another hen in the hen house that she had been alone in, it really speaks to how women hurt women's involvement too. I'm not a big woke woman. I'm not. And I'm very public about that. And the reason I'm not is because I've lived in the real world of women's advancement and I know what it took and I've achieved it. I was not, my glass ceilings were not eluded. I broke them. And yet it wasn't my goal to break them. I broke them because I was a human happening to be a female who just believed I had what it took to sell at a high level and achieve incredible results. And I don't want any quality seats. I don't want any like you're here to, meet a quota seats. I don't want to get picked if I'm not the best person to put on the team. I say in this book, I believe that the best in class salespeople would pick me if they had to pick 5 people to go to war with for their company, whether it was saving their company or achieving high goals. My brothers in this world that I've lived in for 32 years prior to retirement into 2020, they would pick me. They would pick me over men. And I know they would because of my tenacity and my competitiveness and all those things. So the grind begins to outline something that will make the reader start to relate to what this book is about and speak to them on a, I'm going to say a selling soul level, something that I haven't said yet, but there is a selling soul in real salespeople. And man, when you can get inside people as a leader and this is like locker room coach banter. What does the coach say in the timeout in the middle of these football games to turn something around or to accelerate it? Well, it's a language that only athletes understand. Someone else could listen to that speech and it could do nothing for you. I I wish I could quote it, but Rudy, the movie is one of the greatest movies. People ask me what's some of my favorite movies, and that's certainly one of them because, man, as you watch this heart of this kid that wants to go to Notre Dame and play football, and yet he's small and he ends up being the water boy, but he's like the sweetest, like most supportive, biggest fan of the team. And he pretends in one of the scenes in a soliloquy on top of a bench to be the coach that's saying the words to motivate. And man, it makes your hair stand on end because it's coming from some sort of soul place inside him that he's just at the heart of what competition means. And so I'm
Mm.
going to tell you, I think high is going to get salespeople high. And I
Mm.
think this book is going to be something I lecture on huge stages. And if this is not my breakthrough book, I will be shocked. My editor said it best, and I'll finally shut up because I've given you a very long answer. But she said, this is the book your audience has been waiting for. And that's really awesome to hear. So,
How is someone that's listening, how could they instantly recognize that they're not grinding at the level that they could be?
yeah, I think as you read the chapter, one of the great things that we've done is at the end of every chapter, we've called it the high points, pulling on the title high. What are the high points of grinding? And what we're trying to do in grind is make people like pull to the top of their mindset, like what grinding looks like. And the high points are, do you quit short of the extra mile? Have you pushed yourself beyond the breaking limit to see what exists there? So I'm going to first start by saying, if you haven't broke a sales sweat, like right now, if your sales are suffering, but you've kind of given up or it's been hard, so you've pulled back, or you're just kind of waiting for it to come to you, you're not grinding. If you can still break a sweat in a hard market and lay down a hard, prospecting day, despite what the fishing results are, if you can fish all day because you're a fisherman, a pro fisherman, and you're determined to eat, that's grinding. What are you doing with your workday that relates to money making tasks? People spend time every single day doing things that are not going to make them money. They're managing their pipelines, they're managing their clients, they're doing busy work, they're going to meetings, they're listening to reports. But when you really dissect what are the things that advance money making, where does the prospecting lie? And I outline this theory in the chapter. That answer is very poignant to whether you can become a high seller or not. People that are high sellers will stay with prospecting at the top. It may not be the first thing they do in a day, but they are not going to forego those hours. And time block for money making activities. You got to have a placement. I suggest 4 2-hour blocks in a week, wherever that is best suited for you, but maybe at a high energy level, I also suggest. And then measure the difference between your prior results and your results after you measure your future grind time, given a full month of sticking with that new focus and schedule. And the thing that I say in the book is, until you have the ether effects of grinding, until you've gotten to that extra mile, until you've broken that sweat, till you're standing up in your desk with the phone in your hand and your heart accelerated and you've been rejected and you're like screaming like, let's fucking go. Like, you've got to get to that point. I've been able to get to that point. When I had a sales team of 125 people sitting on my floor in Burlington, Massachusetts as a new district manager, a losing team, by the way, last place of 14 districts. And I had spent the 90 days sitting with every single one on an individual basis, learning why they thought they were in last place, and then simulating what was missing. It was vision, plan, and morale. For me to recite missing pieces of a business plan from 25 years ago too should be pretty poignant, because I knew the way forward was to give them a plan, to give them the motivation and inspiration, um, and to increase their morale. And I knew that wasn't going to come from me giving speeches every month and walking away. It wasn't going to be a
Mm.
locker room speech and then, break and letting them run onto the field if they didn't have a tactical playbook, if they didn't have, words can inspire, but it can't sustain. And so I want to be inspirational, but where words of inspiration sustain is when people are operating at a high level with tactical matter. This book is very tactical. There will be chapters that we're going to talk about that are very boring for someone to read. Like I give my playbook on metrics, and it is literally, if you're a sales leader, what are you measuring? And if you don't understand, as a leader, how to take what you're seeing in analytics and then apply the inspiration where the holes are, and the accountability and the activities you need to change those dry spots, you're never getting out of the hole. And so this book is hugely tactical, but make no mistake, it is inspirational for those that are gonna, sit down and apply the theories of these things. So, I think I will always say this, like, you've got to get to the mountaintop. You've got to get to that point where you're ready to quit. You've got to get to that point
Mm.
where you sit down hard and you're like, I can't do this. Like, you've got to get to the point where you're like, your selling soul is questioned about your integrity to sell. And then you've got to be the person, if you're going to be a high seller, whose relationship with that type of moment makes you stand up at some point and say, fuck this, I'm gonna fucking do
I
this.
can relate to that when I'm done 30, 40 podcasts in a week, or like I wanted to, something I love starts to become something I hate. And then the
Yeah,
pride of not quitting.
right.
Or
Yeah,
then like then
but
I did 12 in one day, and I'm thinking, wait, I 12 times 7 is 80, 84. Is that right? So wait, if I did 30 or 40 in a week, I could do a lot more than 40 if I did 12 in a day. Because so what I'm saying is like I can relate to that, feeling like burnt to toast. Is that what you're, is that the theme here? Is it, if put it,
the grind chapter that
go
we're on right now
farther
is,
when you hit the
yeah,
wall.
it's the
Don't stop.
beyond. It's asking people for the beyond. It's pointing to them where I saw the tenacity. In my story, I always tell the story of this district that I was just speaking of and getting last place and all that I did. We just happened to be, when I took over, 6 months away from the start of what they called the Circle of Excellence competition. I mean, 14 districts, 14 major market competitions with 125 LOs in every single district. So, well, some districts had 250 because they had double districts, but like 1,250 loan originators company wide. We're a team of 125. We're in dead last place. We've been in last place, the district I took over, for years. And when I examined the fact that we were being, uh, measured on how much volume we did, loan volume, we had the second highest average loan balance in the country to Southern California, which had its own district. So the only real district that had more propensity to win with wind in their sails was Southern California. What I mean by that is, in Cincinnati, they had to do 3 deals to Boston's, which is where we were located. We were in New England, to R1. For every deal we did, there were districts that had to do 3 because they weren't measuring. Later in the years, this was brought to light that it was unfair competition to be based on volume, and they would weight the results between units and volume 50-50 so that everybody had a shot. It was more about doing loans. But the truth is, companies make money off volume. That's the driver. And so, of course, they make that a metric that they want to work with. When I realized this, taking this team over, and I had my first locker room speech with this group after the 90 days of individual, meetings, I want to tell you, it was in my career, even today, one of the most important speeches I would ever give, locker room sales speeches I would ever give. And first of all, I was the first woman district manager, and a lot of hype had been made about that publicly. H&R Block was a traded company, and there was an article that came out of Kansas City that quoted there had never been a woman at this ranking in their company before. 52 years, I remember it exactly. The company had been open, and they had never had a senior level sales manager at H&R Block that was a woman. And I really didn't like that. And I think you might remember this, but I actually got a call from a New York City prominent newspaper that wanted to do a interest piece on me being the woman that broke the glass ceiling, and I denied the interview. Even then, because I didn't want that to be the story. I told them if they want to talk about me and my, selling prowess and my plan and tell a story about me as an executive and what I'm about to do, I'd love to give them that story. But I don't need some.
Do you think that was because at some level that would diminish your competence
Absolutely,
or
1,000%. It
distract you
continues.
from your goal? Is
It
that the point?
continues to happen.
Is that the point?
I'm constantly telling women, don't make it about our gender. You are diminishing you. As long as they keep setting a kids' table for the women, we're going to be sitting over there and asking permission to sit over here. Fuck that. I've never fucking not been at the main table. And I got my seat off results. And, sure, did I have a harder time getting a promotion than men? Sometimes I did. Sometimes I had to have the very best sales numbers to get the next job. Whereas I was promoted over by other men that had lesser sales results than I did. And I often questioned why, because maybe someone didn't want to make me the first woman of something or something. But I didn't allow that to get in my head. And I just kept at it. I kept running at the wall. Sometimes it took 2 years between job promotions. But the end of this comment I'm making on this team is I'm in this. I can physically remember the conference room in Burlington, Massachusetts, in the building that we were in. And our sales floor was awesome. It had half cubicles. So when you stood up, you could be seen from the chest up. I had riddled that sales floor. Everybody sat in teams of 8. So the cubicles went rows of 8. There was a sales leader, team leader, they called it, who was essentially like a branch manager, and then 8 sales guys. And we had 8 of those sitting on the floor. And then operations people as well. And I sat in a glass office in the corner as a regional VP. And I put out cowbells. I put out sirens with lights. They were peppered all over the tops of these cubicles on the floor. And we would do calling hours at 4 p.m. till 8 p.m. And when I tell you at 7 o'clock, it was like a Wall Street, Wolf of Wall Street scene. The phones were ringing. People were talking. I mean, it was like we were having fun. I would bring in food a lot of times. Of course, it was riddled with high caffeine. At the time, I was a smoker, so I would go outside, and the friggin' banter outside was hilarious. Everybody was having fun. But my original point was that when I stood up in this locker room, the first thing I did is I put up our last place numbers on the screen. And I said, this is where you are. This is where we are today. We're in last place. I now know, having sat with all of you, why we're there. And then I outlined why I thought that was. And then I said, let's everybody take a hard look at this. We're about to enter a race in 90 days. We get a 90-day lead time. And I have a goal for us. And it's just the first step goal. I have no aspirations to get us to number 1 standing here right now, because I think that would literally be too much for you to comprehend. Do I think we're capable of it? I do. Let me tell you why I think we're capable of it. And I showed them that we had the second average highest loan volume, and that everybody else would have to do more loans than we would to get there, and, really put the numbers down. And I said, I've sat with each of you, and I know you have what it takes, but it's going to take an individual push to get us out of last place. And my first goal is to get us, by the time this contest starts, I don't want to be number 14. We can be 13, we can be 12, we can be 11. I don't care how quickly we move the needle, but this is horrible. And this shouldn't be. I mean, this is like a sick, this is something we're ill. Like, we look sick right now. And so if you don't think you're sick, if you don't think that represents you as an individual or your best, I'm going to hand these pins out. And I had this Boston skyline made and the words "moving on up." And that's all I said. We're not going to write number 1, or some farce. We're just going to say we're moving on up, because we got nowhere to go but up. It's kind of a joke. You know, we're moving on up. We're moving on up from where we are. I said, every day I want you to put this pin on yourself and wear it. And if you come in and you forgot it, I want you to come to my office because I have extras and I want you to put it on yourself. And if you see someone that's not wearing this pin, I want you to come get one and give it to them. And every day I want to wear these pins because individually, what you do at your desk, how hard you work, when you want to stop and fool around, when you think, you know, I've done my best, I'm asking you to do better. I'm asking you to cheer each other on. I'm asking you to use a different language than we've used to this point. I'm asking you to come with me on this journey. We are going to go to a positive place, and it starts today. We're going to work harder. We're going to work smarter. I'm going to have the plan laid out. You'll know where you're going. You'll know the steps. We will look every month at our numbers. We will celebrate our progress. We will have fun while we're doing it. And you will be making more money, and we will be making more money as a district, and we will be telling a story. This is our story. What do we want to say? And in 16 months, so I told you it's not easy to get to the best in high selling. When we got the competition would start, and we started as 12th. So we had moved ourselves out of the 14th place. And every month we met and I put up the numbers and we clapped and cheered when we were 13, 12, you know, competition started. And I said, look, if we end up in the middle of the pack before this 9-month contest ends, we're going to have like moved 50% of the needle. When we got to like number 7, these guys were tired. They were coming in having laid their best work. There was momentum. They were achieving higher sales. They were personally making more money. So there were some people that were satisfied that they were making more money. And I knew this was the hard spot. I knew at that point, I said, you know, I said in the locker room what I meant, which was, do you believe that we can be number one? If you believe we can be number one, stand up. And everybody stood up. And I said, if you have, stay standing up. If you have a doubt in your mind that we can be number one, or that I won't give you the steps forward to get there, sit down. Nobody sat down. I said, if you believe the challenges we're going to face, because now we're in the real game, what we just did made us average. We just cleaned up our shit. Like, I don't want to discount everything you guys have just done, but to get from there to here just means we're not sick anymore. We're healthy. Standing here right now, tired, having moved the needle as hard as we have, being healthy, I'm now going to ask you for a different level, a level you have not seen. This is where we become the pro athletes of selling. So let's sit down today and let's talk about what you're missing that you need to sell better. What are the obstacles you're facing? What objections are you facing? Are we hitting roadblocks? Could you be doing more, but you don't know the way forward? And we shifted from just a meeting that was rah-rah into like a true like playbook level. And what emerged for me that I will forever be grateful for, because understand, I do consider myself an expert sales leader, but that expertise did not come because I had all the answers. It came because I watched the best horses that would win the races show me what it took. I was amazed sometimes at what I saw. You know, I always gave them the belief, but I saw those horses pull ahead, you know, when I saw leaders being developed amongst the ranks, when I saw them encouraging, mimicking my leadership, we began to have a meeting every morning, not a meeting. We began to have a circle at, I think it was 7:30 in the morning, which was really early because we didn't need to be there till 9. But people were coming in early and staying late. And pretty soon, like all 125 guys were at their desks at 7:30 in the morning. Like we were like that team that was going to put in the extra. And we picked a name out of a hat every morning that was 125 strong. And for 5 minutes, they were in the bullpen. And they had to step up onto this step aerobic that we put in the middle of the floor. And everybody circled around them, including me. People had their coffee, their breakfast. And for 5 minutes, that floor was that guy's microphone to motivate that sales staff. And so everybody was like nervous, and we didn't want to plan it out. So they had a lot of time to practice. We wanted to on the spot, get up. And sometimes people told a story about overcoming something. Other times people read quotes. They had it in their pocket every day for 2 months, waiting for their name to get pulled. And sometimes people got up and they just gave their best locker room, and it was no longer me. I had transferred my leadership to them. They were leading each other. The momentum was with them. They were riding the playbooks. And when that began to happen, I'm going to tell you, we won the fucking contest, dude. We came in number one 3 days prior to the end, like an epic robbery from the other team that had been number one for 5 years, who was bragging the whole way that we could never do it, who personally told me it was his family's vacation every year, paid for vacation. We won a trip to Switzerland. I was allowed to bring 50 of the top producers and their spouses on an all-paid trip to Switzerland, Montreux, Switzerland for 7 days. And I got to step on stage at that event and have the number one guy concede and hand me the number one trophy. And to hear that CEO, who will be mentioned in this book, because I am talking about all my leaders that gave me chances to be a high seller, who gave me a shot at leading a sales team, who witnessed, who believed in me, gave me the shot, and then witnessed me win. This isn't just gave me a promotion. These are the people that gave me a promotion. These are the people who said, you're going to be my coach. You're going to make us more money. You're a winning racehorse. And I am very out loud and proud about all of this. I talk about Joe Penabianco buying Lintegra because I had a 2-year contract and I had just gotten there 90 days prior, and he wanted me. Ryan Kuby had convinced him that I was one of the best sales leaders, having come off the H&R Block run, and he flew to Boston. I had 50 loan officers. I'd only been there 90 days coming off the H&R Block closure. And he wanted me, he wanted to recruit me. He wanted me to be the vice president of sales for Annie Mac at the time, a prior name before we became Annie Mac. And I couldn't get out of contract without having to write a 6-figure check back, because I had gotten a huge guarantee to go there. And he said, well, how much to buy the company? And he bought a company that was not for sale, convinced the owner to sell it to him for an incredible price, millions, so that he could acquire my contract and put me in a seat to build Annie Mac. And I've not beat my chest over things like that in my life because I felt like other people would look down on it. But this book is unapologetic about all these things. I'm in the perfect place mentally right now to tell you I am one of the best, and I will make something great if you give it to me out of something good. And this book says, finally, I'm not looking for the lowlifes of selling in this book. I am not looking for the guys that are broken and unable to fix themselves. I am not talking to those guys. It's the same with coaching. We get people all the time. I know they're not fit for coaching. I unsell it in the sales discovery call. I'm like, you're not ready for this. You're not right for this. Like, I would even question whether you're right for this industry or your position. Quite frankly, you sound like an operations person. And I'm fucking unforgiving about that, because the truth is, there is no crying in baseball when it comes to sales. I am a huge-hearted, emotional individual. I am a strong, tenacious sales leader. I had what it took to tell people when their business plans were failing exactly why they were failing to their face in a painful, hurtful way, without a lot of empathy, because I needed them to either rise or quit. Because quitting for me was every bit as good as rising. And what I mean by that is, the minute a non-producer would move off my team, it made a place for somebody that I could bring up that could do it. And when you're doing, and I write about that later in chapters, you're going to see me talk about recruiting, and you're going to see me talk about cutting your bottom 20%. And I could cut people. I've cut here in the last few years. So, I'll stop there, but yeah.
In the spirit of, I don't want you to stop. So let's listen to, if you're listening to this, go to chapter 2 of High Selling. Get your ass over there. My takeaway, I could be doing a hell of a lot more. It's funny. I want to second everything you just said. What you did there, I'm so excited for the organizations that are qualified and been vetted through, because what that story of what you accomplish in that vertical for that large organization, when a whole company does that, that's worth, it's a priceless, because that's a market dominator. So the exciting, the companies that kind of wake up to that idea to have you a part of their growth, their strategic growth, you and your organization today, that's a priceless. That, Churchill used that type of energy to win the war when he got on his radio every day and inspired England to not succumb to the fear of getting pummeled every day by Hitler. Every day they were getting bombs on them. And Churchill, using the word and what you're talking about in those team meetings, those huddles, and that culture, saved the world essentially from the Nazis. So I don't want to underplay that. Like, we're going to go down this road of high selling. And my takeaway is, just simple math. I realize, like, if I could do 12 shows in a day, then why am I not doing 84 in a week? And that's 4,368 in a year. And I said the other day, John Duffin on the show, my goal is to do 10,000 podcasts, and I'm at five. It was 580, so I need 9,420. And then we were like, well, if at the current rate, because it's one a day is going out, it'll take 29, 25 or 6 years to hit the goal. Now, listen, I'm pretty confident I'll live to 59. But then I'm like, that sucks. As Brad would say, do more, get better, scale. So, Christine, my takeaway is I have so many notes from this conversation. I can do more. I'm going to do more. I've already got a bit more of a strategy. And yeah, the team, if you're listening to this, you should be scared. Anxiety's coming for you. And we're going to run this train off the tracks, because we could do more. We can get better. We could scale. I'm
Awesome.
ready to rock the day after this.
Let's go.
Thank you. You're the best. You're amazing. If you're listening to this episode of the Culture Matters podcast, follow our journey. Listen to all the dozens of episodes Christine has been on the show, and stay tuned for the next chapter of high selling. And please leave us a review in the Culture Matters podcast, and we will see you next time. Thanks, Christine.